More than 10,000 Russian soldiers have been captured or have surrendered in the war in Ukraine. And that number is still rising as the fighting enters a harsher and more unforgiving phase. By the end of 2025, data released by Ukrainian authorities pointed to a pattern that can no longer be ignored. On multiple fronts, from Donetsk to Zaporizhzhia, Russian troops are laying down their weapons in growing numbers, even as Moscow continues to pour large sums of money into bonuses, contracts, and recruitment drives to keep men in uniform. This is not just a battlefield statistic. It is a warning signal. When an army starts to lose control over morale, the danger is not limited to one failed assault or one lost position. It threatens the ability to sustain a long war at all, especially one built on constant pressure, high casualties, and relentless surveillance from the air. What is unfolding goes far beyond simple desertion. It points to the emergence of a modern form of psychological warfare, one that targets individual soldiers at their weakest moments and turns fear, exhaustion, and isolation into strategic leverage. Thousands of Russian troops are choosing capture over continued combat. That choice raises uncomfortable questions for Moscow and reveals a calculated opportunity for Kyiv. Why are so many soldiers deciding that surrender is safer than obedience? And how is Ukraine converting that despair into an advantage that could reshape the balance of this war? Money no longer keeps Russian soldiers on the battlefield, and that shift exposes a deeper problem inside Moscow's war effort. Since 2024 and throughout 2025, Russia has sharply increased salaries, enlistment bonuses, and contract incentives to replace mounting losses, with state media and independent reporting confirming payments far above normal civilian wages. The strategy was simple and urgent. Higher pay was meant to fill depleted units fast and keep manpower flowing despite casualties. On paper, the numbers looked convincing. In practice, the battlefield has stripped those promises of their power. The reason is risk, because modern combat in Ukraine has changed the basic math every soldier makes before an attack. Constant drone presence means movement is detected early, artillery responds faster, and survival often depends on luck rather than skill. A cash bonus loses meaning when surveillance never stops, and strikes arrive without warning. In this environment, extra money cannot offset the feeling that exposure is permanent and escape routes are limited. Russian recruitment drives also face a timing problem because financial incentives arrive before deployment, while danger begins the moment a unit reaches the front. Once soldiers experience daily drone pressure, repeated bombardment, and long stretches without rest, the value of future pay fades quickly. Reports from multiple fronts describe troops who realize that promised income may never reach their families if they do not survive the first weeks. That realization changes behavior in ways no contract clause can fix. Another weakness lies in who these incentives target, because higher pay has drawn in people with fewer options rather than hardened professionals. Many recruits accept contracts to solve immediate financial stress, not to fight a long war under constant threat. When conditions turn harsher than expected, loyalty tied to money proves fragile. Discipline built on paychecks alone struggles once fear replaces hope. The battlefield itself reinforces this collapse in confidence. Low-altitude drones track trenches, roads, and supply lines without pause, while artillery strikes punish any detected movement. Soldiers learn quickly that experience offers limited protection against sensors and precision fire. As losses continue, trust in leadership erodes, especially when rotations are delayed and units remain exposed longer than planned. Money cannot rebuild confidence once that trust breaks. This is why many soldiers now describe the front as a place with no clear exit. Retreat is dangerous, advance is deadly, and waiting invites detection. In that space, obedience feels less rational than survival. When a soldier believes that following orders leads only to higher odds of death, the calculation shifts. Surrender begins to look like a choice rather than a failure. The growing gap between financial promises and battlefield reality explains why incentives are losing their grip. pay can attract recruits, but it cannot sustain morale under constant observation and fire. The question now is not how much Moscow is willing to spend, but how long money can compete with fear in a war shaped by drones and artillery. How long can cash hold a soldier in a place where survival feels uncertain every hour? Share your view in the comments. More than 10,000 Russian prisoners is no longer a background statistic, because it signals a structural shift in how this war is unfolding. According to data released by the Coordination Headquarters for the Treatment of Prisoners of War and the I Want to Live project, the total number of Russian soldiers captured or surrendered passed the 10,000 mark by the end of 2025. This figure matters because it reflects confirmed custody rather than estimates of losses, and it represents people removed from the fight in a visible and measurable way. The pace behind that total tells an even sharper story. Ukrainian reporting shows that 2025 alone produced more Russian surrenders than 2022 and 2023 combined. That pattern points to momentum, not a spike caused by one battle or one local collapse. When a trend accelerates year over year during a long war, it usually reflects pressure that has reached multiple fronts at once. This volume of prisoners also challenges traditional expectations about offensive and defensive roles. In most conflicts, the side pushing forward captures more enemy troops as territory changes hands and units are surrounded. In Ukraine, the opposite has emerged. Ukraine is now capturing more Russian soldiers than Russia captures Ukrainian troops. That imbalance exposes weaknesses in Russian assaults and highlights how often attacking units become isolated or broken before objectives are secured. Numbers on this scale also affect planning beyond the front line. Each captured soldier represents training time, equipment, and pay that no longer contribute to combat power. Replacing those losses requires new recruits who need weeks or months to reach basic readiness, while experienced units continue to thin. Over time, that cycle strains command structures and reduces the ability to sustain pressure across wide areas. When surrender becomes common knowledge rather than a rare event, it changes how risk is perceived. Capture stops being viewed as an unthinkable outcome and starts to appear as a known path with defined rules. That shift alone can alter behavior during combat. Geography reinforces the trend. Many of the largest captures have occurred in sectors known for repeated assaults and heavy losses, including parts of eastern and southern Ukraine. These are areas where advances have been slow, rotations have been delayed, and exposure to drones and artillery has been constant. In such conditions, the decision to lay down arms often reflects exhaustion rather than ideology. The growing prisoner count also gives Ukraine leverage outside immediate fighting. Larger pools of captives increase options during exchanges and strengthen Kyiv's hand in negotiations tied to humanitarian corridors or returns of its own personnel. At the same time, each interrogation adds fragments of information about unit morale, supply gaps, and training quality, which feeds back into operational planning. Taken together, the 10,000 figure marks a turning point. It shows that surrender is no longer an edge case but part of the battlefield reality. When capture rates rise faster than recruitment success, the balance shifts in subtle but lasting ways. This is why the number cannot be brushed aside as propaganda or coincidence. It reflects a war that is grinding down people as much as equipment, and the effects are now visible in the prisoner camps as clearly as on the map. I Want to Live turns surrender into a designed escape route, and that design explains why it works under modern battlefield pressure. Ukraine did not present the program as a loud public campaign aimed at mass audiences. Instead, I Want to Live was built as a quiet system that reaches individual soldiers through devices already in their pockets. The project operates through a dedicated website, an automated chatbot, and a Telegram channel with simple contact forms. This structure matters because it removes ceremony and delay. A single message can start a process without drawing attention from nearby commanders or fellow troops. The choice of platform is strategic rather than symbolic. Smartphones are often the only private space left to soldiers living under constant watch. Orders are monitored, movements are tracked, and conversations inside units are rarely free. Personal phones offer a narrow gap where fear and doubt can surface. By placing the option there, the program meets soldiers at the moment when isolation feels strongest. The message itself is carefully framed. It does not insult, threaten, or demand loyalty. It offers clarity. Soldiers are told that surrender will follow the rules of the Geneva Conventions and that treatment in custody will include food, medical care, and contact with family. These promises stand in sharp contrast to conditions many troops report from the front. When daily life involves uncertainty about meals, sleep, and evacuation after injury, predictability becomes a powerful incentive. Another key element is choice. The program outlines what happens next, rather than leaving outcomes vague. Captured soldiers may enter prisoner exchanges later, or seek options beyond the battlefield when the war ends. That forward-looking angle shifts thinking away from immediate fear and toward survival after combat. It frames surrender not as defeat, but as a pause from a situation that feels endless. This approach differs from traditional psychological operations that rely on mass messaging. Leaflets and broadcasts aim to influence large groups at once, but they struggle against modern censorship and skepticism. "I want to live" bypasses those barriers by focusing on personal decision-making. It does not ask soldiers to persuade others. It asks them to decide for themselves. The impact becomes stronger as stories circulate. Soldiers who surrender and survive become proof that the system functions as described. Even limited confirmation spreads fast through informal networks. Once trust forms, the barrier to action drops. The program does not need universal belief. It needs just enough confidence to tip individual calculations. From a military perspective, the value extends beyond numbers. Each surrender weakens an enemy unit without a firefight. The most important shift may be psychological. Surrender is reframed from shame into a rational response to conditions. When that idea takes hold, discipline based on fear loses force. Control slips not through mutiny, but through quiet exits taken one phone message at a time. That raises a simple question that echoes across the front. If surrounded by drones, cut off from support, and offered a clear path out, would survival outweigh obedience? The growing number of messages suggests many already know the answer. The profile of those surrendering shows that this wave is not coming from elite units, and that detail explains why it continues to spread across the front. Data cited by United 24. Media shows that most captured Russian troops are low-ranking soldiers rather than trained leaders or specialists. These are infantrymen and support personnel who operate closest to danger and face constant exposure to drones, artillery, and surveillance. Their role places them at the highest risk while giving them the least influence over decisions that shape their survival. When pressure rises, they absorb the impact first. Contract soldiers make up a large share of those who surrender, which highlights how recruitment choices affect battlefield behavior. Many entered service during economic hardship and viewed military contracts as a temporary solution to personal problems. Once deployed, expectations meet reality quickly. Pay may exist on paper, but survival depends on luck and conditions outside individual control. When that gap becomes clear, commitment weakens and loyalty tied to money fades. Reporting from BBC and The Telegraph also points to soldiers who were misled or pressured into joining. Some believed their duties would be far from direct combat. Others expected limited deployments or support roles. When those assumptions collapse under fire, trust in leadership erodes. Orders lose legitimacy once soldiers feel they were brought to the front under false promises. The low number of captured officers adds another layer to this picture. Commanders rarely appear among prisoners, which suggests leadership remains positioned away from the most dangerous sectors. Risk flows downward while authority stays protected. Over time, this imbalance damages cohesion. Soldiers who feel treated as expendable assets begin to prioritize survival over obedience, especially when losses mount and rotations fail to arrive. Social background further explains why this group breaks first. Many surrendering troops come from poorer regions, with limited education or unstable work histories before enlistment. Some carry criminal records that reduced civilian options. Military service offered income and structure. The battlefield delivered isolation and constant threat instead. When the promise collapses, endurance loses meaning. This composition matters because it shapes how fear spreads inside units. Elite formations often rely on shared identity and training to hold under pressure. The soldiers filling trenches lack that foundation. Motivation rests on pay and fear of punishment. The effect compounds during combat. Less experienced troops struggle to adapt to modern warfare dominated by sensors and precision strikes. Mistakes lead to quick losses, reinforcing the belief that they are being consumed rather than protected. Each capture confirms that belief for others still holding positions nearby. Taken together, the portrait is clear. This is not a collapse among Russia's most capable fighters. It is pressure breaking. Those carrying the heaviest burden with the least protection. When wars rely on such layers to absorb losses, stress builds fast. That structure explains why surrender continues to rise. It is driven by recruitment choices, unequal risk, and eroding trust, not ideology. As long as frontline soldiers remain exposed while leadership stays distant, the flow toward capture is likely to continue. Russia's recruitment system framed the war as a social ladder for people with limited options, yet the reality of the battlefield has torn that promise apart and created space for a new form of psychological pressure. For many recruits, military service was sold as a way out of hardship. Higher pay, signing bonuses, and steady contracts offered stability that civilian life could not provide. This logic worked while danger remained abstract. Once soldiers reached the front, that promise lost its meaning. Constant drone surveillance, rapid artillery response, and long exposure without relief turned daily life into a survival test. Income stopped feeling like compensation and started to feel irrelevant. Soldiers who joined for financial reasons did not expect a battlefield where control is limited and chance decides outcomes. As casualties grew, the idea of moving up in society collapsed into a simpler question about staying alive. That shift weakened discipline and opened a psychological gap. Smartphones became the key channel. In a war where movement and speech are watched, a personal device offers rare privacy. That moment allows doubt to surface without immediate punishment. This approach erodes morale without large-scale confrontation. Each surrender removes a soldier from the line and reduces pressure on nearby units. News of capture spreads quietly through personal networks. As these stories circulate, confidence in leadership declines. Soldiers begin to question whether orders serve any purpose beyond exposure. Once that doubt takes root, fear-based discipline loses power. The strategic gains extend further. Every captured soldier increases leverage during prisoner exchanges, which helps bring Ukrainian personnel home. That leverage grows steadily as numbers rise. This method targets choice at the individual level. It recognizes that modern soldiers live with constant information flow and private uncertainty. A message delivered at the right moment can outweigh months of preparation. No loud broadcast is needed. Timing and access do the work. The effect feeds back into recruitment. When soldiers see that money cannot guarantee safety or respect, new contracts lose appeal. Retention becomes harder as stories of surrender circulate. This is not about spectacle or humiliation. It is about control over decisions. Each message creates a fork. One path leads back to orders and sacrifice. The other leads to captivity and survival. As more soldiers choose the second option, the cost of maintaining combat power rises for Moscow. What emerges is a form of warfare that operates alongside drones and artillery, but targets the human layer beneath them. It shows that control over perception can matter as much as control over ground. In a conflict shaped by technology, the moment when a soldier gets connected to information can influence outcomes far beyond a single trench. More than 10,000 Russian soldiers captured or surrendered is not just a headline number. It is a warning sign that something inside this war is breaking from within. Across the front, money failed to hold morale. Recruitment bonuses failed to stop fear. Drone warfare, constant surveillance, and relentless pressure turned obedience into a risk rather than a duty. Ukraine then stepped into that gap with a new kind of psychological warfare, one built not on loud threats but on quiet choices made on personal screens. The result is a steady flow of soldiers leaving the fight without a firefight. If this trend continues, the balance shifts in several ways at once. Ukraine reduces pressure on its front lines. Kyiv gains leverage in prisoner exchanges. Intelligence flows directly from the battlefield. Each surrender weakens units without costing ammunition or lives on the Ukrainian side. The larger question now sits in Moscow. Will tighter control and harsher discipline restore fear fast enough to stop the flow, or will more money be thrown in? Neither option guarantees results when trust is fading. What happens next remains open. Will surrender accelerate as pressure grows, or will the system adapt and harden? The answer may define the next phase of this war. If this kind of clear battlefield analysis matters, like the video, share it, and subscribe to Military Force for more in-depth reporting on how modern wars are really being fought.